The text message came at 3 a.m. Dad's in the hospital again. I stared at my phone in the darkness of my Manhattan apartment, 18 floors above a city that never sleeps, wondering if I should even care. 10 years since I'd spoken to the man who taught me that love came with conditions I could never meet. I still remember the day I left Oak Ridge, Missouri, population 8,216 and shrinking, with nothing but a backpack, $237 in cash, and a one-way bus ticket. The town where my family name meant something to everyone except my own family. They say success is the best revenge. What they don't tell you is how hollow that revenge feels when there's no one left who matters to witness it. But that changed last summer when I found something more valuable than revenge, a scruffy terrier mix with no collar, shivering in Central Park during a thunderstorm. I didn't know then that rescuing that dog would force me to confront everything I'd been running from. Or that it would lead me back home for my sister's wedding, the perfect stage for the truth I'd been hiding to finally come out. This is the story of how I lost a family, found a dog, and accidentally crossed paths with one of the richest men in America. And how sometimes, the family you're born into isn't the family you end up with. In Oak Ridge, the Callahan name meant something. My grandfather had built the largest hardware store in 3 counties, and my father, Richard, inherited both the business and the reputation. What he didn't inherit was my grandfather's warmth or generosity. Growing up, our sprawling craftsman home on Maple Street was where I learned that appearances mattered more than feelings. Dad was the Chamber of Commerce president, Little League coach, and church deacon, the all-American success story. Mom, Elizabeth, was his perfect complement, PTA president, charity fundraiser, and hostess extraordinaire. My older sister Megan was the golden child, homecoming queen, valedictorian, and now a pediatrician married to her college sweetheart. And then there was me, Daniel. The disappointment. Danny's just sensitive, Mom would explain when I'd rather read than play football. He'll toughen up eventually. Dad's response was less diplomatic. No son of mine is going to be some artsy weakling. I remember my 12th birthday party. Dad had invited the entire baseball team I'd quit the month before. When I opened his gift, an expensive Louisville Slugger, I couldn't hide my disappointment. I was hoping for the telescope I showed you, I mumbled. The party went silent. Dad's face hardened. Telescopes are for boys who want to stare at the sky instead of making something of themselves down here on Earth. Later that night, I found the bat snapped in half and thrown in the trash. Dad never mentioned it, but he made sure I paid for it by working weekends at the store for 6 months. High school brought new humiliations. At 16, I worked up the courage to audition for the school musical. I still remember Dad's laughter when he found the script in my backpack. My son prancing around on stage? Not while you're under my roof. That night at dinner, he announced he'd sign me up for a summer construction job with his buddy's company. Time you learned what real work looks like. The summer before senior year, everything changed. I'd been secretly applying to art schools, hiding brochures under my mattress like contraband. When my acceptance letter from Rhode Island School of Design arrived with a partial scholarship, Mom intercepted it. That evening, Dad presented me with his grand gesture. A contract making me junior partner at Callahan Hardware after 4 years at the state business school he'd chosen for me. He'd had it framed. This is your future, son. I've arranged everything with the business department. Your legacy. The paper trembled in my hands as the future he'd mapped out for me, one without a single brushstroke or sketch, became suffocatingly real. Thank you, I managed to say, though the words felt like glass in my throat. What Dad didn't know was that I had a secret bank account with nearly $5,000 I'd earned selling portraits online. Or that I'd already accepted Riz's offer and deferred for a year to save more money. What I didn't know was that Mom had found my acceptance letter and kept it from Dad. He means well, Danny, she whispered when she caught me crying in the garage that night. This is just how he shows love. But I'd stopped believing that years ago. Hey everyone, drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Sometimes I wonder if there's anyone else from small towns like Oak Ridge who managed to escape the weight of family expectations. When Megan's wedding invitation arrived last June, my first instinct was to toss it. 10 years of carefully constructed distance couldn't be breached by cream-colored cardstock and calligraphy. But there was a handwritten note from my sister. "Please come, Danny. Mom's not well." 3 weeks later, I was on a flight to St. Louis, rental car reservation confirmed, hotel booked far enough from my parents' house to maintain sanity. I'd built a life in New York as Daniel, not Danny, a successful commercial artist with a Manhattan apartment and clients who respected me. I wasn't going to let 4 days in Missouri undo that. The Friday before the wedding, I pulled into the gravel driveway of my childhood home. Mason, the terrier mix I'd rescued, panting excitedly in the passenger seat. After finding his owner, billionaire tech entrepreneur Warren Blackwood, I'd expected a reward. Instead, he'd offered me something better, a job redesigning his company's entire visual identity. But when he learned I was heading back to Missouri for a wedding, he asked an unexpected favor. "Take Mason with you," he'd said. "He hates kennels, and my daughter's allergic. Plus, he's the best icebreaker I know." Looking at the weathered porch swing where Dad used to tell me I needed to man up, I was grateful for Mason's warm presence against my leg. Mom opened the door before I could knock. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging loosely on her once sturdy frame. The cancer she'd battled twice before had returned, Megan had told me, but seeing the evidence was still jarring. "My Danny," she whispered, pulling me into a hug that smelled like the same Chanel No. 5 she'd worn my entire life. Dad appeared behind her, more gray than I remembered but standing just as tall, just as imposing. "So you decided to show up after all," he said, eyes flicking from me to Mason, then to the rental car. "German. Figures you'd spend extra on foreign when American would do just fine." And just like that, I was 16 again. The rehearsal dinner that evening was at the Oak Ridge Country Club, where Dad had once proudly displayed the junior golf trophy I'd won before abandoning the sport. The clubhouse had been renovated, but the same families occupied the same hierarchy they had when I left. "Daniel designs for Fortune 500 companies now," Megan told everyone proudly at dinner. "He's even worked with Warren Blackwood." Dad scoffed. "Drawing pictures for a living. That California fairy who made his money off other people's addiction to those pocket computers." I felt my face flush. "Warren Blackwood is from Boston, Dad. And those pocket computers revolutionized global communication. They ruined real conversation is what they did," Dad countered, jabbing his fork toward me. "Like the kind we might have had if you'd bothered to call your mother when she was going through chemo." The table went silent. Megan's fiancé, Thomas, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Richard, please," Mom murmured. "Not tonight." "When then, Liz?" "The boy shows up after 10 years like nothing happened. Left you crying for months. Abandoned the business that would have set him up for life. For what? To draw logos for people who don't give a damn about him." I stood up so quickly my chair toppled backward. "I need some air." Outside, I found Mason waiting patiently where I'd left him tied to a bench. I unclipped his leash and let him run across the empty golf course, his joy a stark contrast to the suffocation I felt inside. My phone buzzed, Warren checking on Mason. I snapped a picture of him chasing fireflies and sent it. Seconds later, Warren called. "How's the family reunion going?" he asked. "About as expected," I replied. "Like walking barefoot on broken glass." "Family's complicated," he said. "Lost my dad at 14, never really resolved things. Sometimes I think that's why I work so hard, trying to prove something to a ghost." His unexpected vulnerability calmed me. Here was one of the most powerful men in tech talking to me like a friend, while my own father couldn't see past his disappointment. When I returned to the table, dessert was being served. Dad was holding court, telling the story of how he'd single-handedly saved the town's 4th of July parade last year when funding fell through. "The Callahan name means something in this town," he was saying. "It's about responsibility. Commitment. Things some people run from at the first sign of challenge." Our eyes met across the table, his message unmistakable. Later that night, as wedding guests gathered for drinks at the hotel bar, I overheard my father talking to Thomas's parents. "Danny was always different," he said, lowering his voice but not enough. "Sensitive. Could never handle criticism. His mother babied him too much. Then he just up and left without a word, broke his mother's heart. Now he shows up with some mutt, probably thinks he's better than all of us with his fancy New York life. Something snapped inside me. 10 years of carefully maintained distance collapsed into white-hot rage. Tomorrow, at the wedding reception, everyone would know exactly who Richard Callahan really was. Hey everyone! If you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. Now back to what happened next. The morning of Megan's wedding dawned clear and hot, typical Missouri August. I woke to Mason licking my face and 3 missed calls from my mother. The text that followed was simple. Your father wants to talk. Please come early. I arrived at St. Andrew's Episcopal an hour before the ceremony, Mason waiting in the air-conditioned rental car. The church looked smaller than I remembered, its white steeple less imposing, its stained glass less vibrant. Inside, the air was heavy with lilies and anticipation. Dad was waiting in the pastor's office, dressed in his charcoal suit, red tie perfectly knotted. For a moment, I saw him as others might, distinguished, successful, proud. Then he spoke. I want today to go smoothly for your sister, he said without preamble. No drama. I'm not the one who creates drama, Dad. He sighed heavily, like I was still a difficult child. Look, I've been thinking. That contract I offered you, it's still open. Callahan Hardware could use someone with your creative skills for marketing. The online stuff. You could move back, get a nice place on Cedar Lake. Your mother would love having you close, especially now. The offer hung between us like a poisoned gift. On the surface, an olive branch. Underneath, the same old message. Come back, but on my terms. Is that why you wanted to talk? To reel me back in? I asked. For God's sake, Daniel. Your mother is sick. The business needs help. Your family, whether you like it or not. Family? The word tasted bitter. You want to talk about family now? Where was family when you threw away my art school acceptance letter? His face registered genuine confusion. What the hell are you talking about? The letter from RASD. Mom found it, but you're the one who made it disappear. Just like you tried to make every part of me that didn't fit your plan disappear. Dad's expression hardened. I never saw any letter. Your mother would have told me. Like she told you about finding me crying in the garage? Or about the time you made me work off a baseball bat I never wanted? Or about how every time I tried to be myself, you shut it down? The church bells chimed, signaling 30 minutes until the ceremony. Dad straightened his tie. His tell when he was done with the conversation. We're not doing this now. Today is about Megan, not your grievances. He brushed past me, our shoulders colliding. The impact was slight, but it knocked something loose inside me, the final thread of hope that he might ever see me. The ceremony was beautiful. Megan radiant. I played my part, dutiful brother, smiling for photos, shaking hands with distant relatives who commented on how different I looked, how New York had changed me. At the reception, held under a massive tent in the country club gardens, Dad gave a toast that had everyone misty-eyed, about family legacy, about a father's love, about the values he'd instilled in his exceptional children. The hypocrisy burned in my chest like acid. When the dancing started, I slipped away to check on Mason. He greeted me with frantic joy, clearly tired of confinement. On impulse, I unclipped his leash and led him back to the reception. If Dad wanted appearances maintained, a rescue dog wasn't part of the picture. I was at the bar getting another bourbon when the commotion started. Mason had found the buffet table and was helping himself to the prime rib. By the time I reached him, Dad was already there, face flushed with anger. Get that mutt out of here, he hissed, grabbing Mason's collar roughly. Mason yelped in pain, and something in me broke free. Don't touch my dog, I said, voice carrying across the suddenly quiet tent. Your dog? This is your sister's wedding, not a kennel. Get it out, now. His name is Mason, and he belongs to Warren Blackwood. You know, the California Ferry, who's about to become my biggest client. A ripple went through the crowd. Dad's grip on Mason loosened. Warren Blackwood? Someone murmured. The war in Blackwood? I picked up Mason, facing my father across a table of half-eaten appetizers and floral centerpieces. You know, Dad, for years I wondered what I did wrong. Why wasn't I good enough? Why couldn't you love the son you had instead of the one you wanted? My voice was steady, surprising me. But now I understand. It was never about me. The tent had gone completely silent. Even the band had stopped playing. You throw around words like legacy and family values, but you don't know what they mean. You talk about responsibility while you manipulate and control. You preach commitment while you reject anyone who doesn't mirror your narrow view of success. Dad's face had gone from red to white. That's enough, Daniel. No, it's not nearly enough, I continued, my voice rising. You want to know why I left? Why I cut you off completely? It wasn't just the art school letter. It was realizing that nothing I ever did would be enough. That your love came with conditions I could never meet. I turned to the silent crowd, many of whom had known me since childhood. My father likes to talk about the Callahan name, what it stands for in this town. Let me tell you what it means to me. It means constantly being told I wasn't enough. It means having my dreams mocked and my identity erased. It means a man who puts his reputation above his children's happiness. Mom appeared at Dad's side, her face stricken. Danny, please. I'm sorry, Mom, but it's time for the truth. Dad never saw my acceptance letter because you hid it from him. You knew what he'd do, and you thought you were protecting me. But you were really protecting him from having to face who I really am. The shock on Dad's face as he turned to Mom confirmed what I'd long suspected. She hadn't just found the letter, she'd made the decision to keep it from both of us. Is this true, Elizabeth? Dad asked, his voice barely audible. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I was trying to keep the peace, Richard. You were so set on the hardware store, and Danny was so unhappy. I couldn't bear to see her pain, especially now. With Mason still in my arms, I backed away. I've built a good life without your approval, Dad. I don't need it anymore. As I walked out of the tent, past shocked faces and whispered conversations, I felt a strange weightlessness. The secret was out. The confrontation I'd both dreaded and longed for was over. Behind me, I heard my father calling my name, not in anger, but in something that sounded almost like desperation. For the first time in my life, I didn't turn back. I spent that night at the hotel, Mason curled beside me as I stared at the ceiling. My phone buzzed constantly, texts from Megan, from Mom, even one from Thomas thanking me for saying what needed to be said. None from Dad. Around midnight, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Mom standing there, looking fragile in the harsh hallway light. May I come in? She asked. We sat on the edge of the bed, Mason nestled between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. I should have told you about the letter, she finally said. I convinced myself I was protecting you, but I was really protecting myself. From having to choose sides. Why did you keep it from Dad? She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd forgotten about. You didn't see him after you left. How lost he was. How angry. He'd built his entire identity around being a certain kind of father, running a certain kind of business, maintaining a certain kind of reputation. When you rejected all that, it was like you rejected him. He rejected me first, I said, the old hurt rising. Yes, she admitted quietly. He did. But Danny, your father loves you in the only way he knows how. His own father was so much worse, cold, demanding, never a word of praise. Richard swore he'd be different. He wasn't different enough, I said. No, he wasn't. She took my hand. But here's something you don't know. After you left, he kept every article about you he could find. Every mention of your work. He has a folder in his desk labeled Daniel's Career. I felt something shift inside me, not forgiveness, exactly, but a crack in the wall I'd built. There's something else, Mom continued. The cancer, it's stage 4. We've tried everything. I have maybe 6 months. The words hit like physical blows. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked them not to. I didn't want you to come home out of obligation. I put my arm around her thin shoulders, feeling her bones through her sweater. I would have come. No matter what. I know that now. She smiled sadly. Which is why I need to ask you something. When I'm gone, your father will be alone. Megan has her own life with Thomas. The store is struggling, online competition, the economy. He won't ask for help, but he needs it. Not forever, just don't disappear again. I couldn't promise. Not yet. But I nodded, and she seemed to understand. The next morning, I was packing to leave when my phone rang. Warren Blackwood. How's my dog? He asked without preamble. Living his best life as a wedding crasher, I replied, watching Mason chase his tail on the hotel carpet. And how about his temporary owner? I hesitated. Complicated. Family usually is, he said. Listen, I've been thinking about our project. What if we expanded it? Not just a visual rebrand, but a complete overhaul of how Blackwood Tech interfaces with communities. Starting with struggling small businesses in rural areas. My heart quickened. What exactly are you suggesting? A pilot program. We provide technology, training, and design services to help small businesses compete in the digital marketplace. We need a test case, a business with history, community ties, but struggling to adapt. Like a hardware store in a small Midwestern town? I asked, the idea taking shape. Exactly like that. It would need someone on site, someone who understands both worlds. The project would take 6 months, maybe a year. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, mind racing. Was this an opportunity or a trap? A chance to heal old wounds or reopen them? I was still debating when a text came through from an unknown number. At the store if you want to talk. Dad, Callahan Hardware looked exactly as I remembered. The faded green awning, the bell that jangled when you opened the door, the smell of paint and wood and metal. But it felt emptier, the shelves less stocked, the lighting dimmer. Dad was at the counter, looking older in his flannel shirt and jeans than he had in his suit. Wasn't sure you'd come, he said. Neither was I. We walked through the aisles in awkward silence until we reached the back office. His domain, where I'd never been welcome as a child. Inside, pinned to a corkboard behind his desk, were dozens of clippings, magazine articles about campaigns I'd worked on, printouts of my design work, even my business card. The Daniel's career folder Mom had mentioned was real. You've done well for yourself, Dad said gruffly. No thanks to you, I replied, the words automatic but lacking their usual bite. He nodded, accepting the hit. I deserve that. I deserved most of what you said yesterday too. Coming from Richard Callahan, this was the equivalent of falling to his knees begging forgiveness. Why did you really want me to take over the store? I asked. The truth. He sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. Because it was all I had to give you, he said simply. I'm not good with words or feelings. Never was. But this, he gestured around the store, this was something concrete. Something real I could pass on. But I never wanted it. No, he agreed. You wanted a different life. A bigger life. And you got it. He pointed to the clippings. I just didn't know how to support a dream I didn't understand. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But from Dad, it was monumental. Mom told me about her prognosis, I said. His face crumpled briefly before he regained control. She's the strongest person I know. Always has been. In that moment of shared grief, something unexpected happened. Dad reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a faded drawing, one I'd made in high school of our family standing in front of the store. You always could see things the rest of us missed, he said, his finger tracing the image. Like how your mother's smile is different when she's really happy versus just being polite. Or how Megan stands taller when she's nervous. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. I didn't keep this because it showed the store. I kept it because it showed us. All of us. Together. That's when I told him about Warren Blackwood's proposal. About how Callahan Hardware could become the prototype for a new kind of small-town business. One that honored tradition while embracing innovation. You want to bring your New York ideas here? He asked, but without the usual derision. I want to bring my skills here, I corrected. For 6 months. And maybe, for us. 2 days later, as I boarded my flight back to New York, to pack up my apartment and make arrangements for a 6-month leave, I got a text from Megan. Dad's at the store measuring wall space for, quote, Daniel's design area. Whatever you said, thank you. Warren was waiting when I landed at JFK, Mason straining at his leash when he spotted me. So, he asked as we walked to his car. Are we going to save a hardware store in Missouri? We're going to try, I said. But I think we might be saving something else along the way. He smiled knowingly. That's usually how it works. 3 months later, Callahan Hardware and Design launched its new website, featuring local artisans alongside traditional hardware. Dad had resisted at first, then grudgingly admitted that the makerspace I'd carved out in the back of the store was bringing in customers we'd never have seen otherwise. Mom's health stabilized briefly, long enough to see the first Blackwood Community Business Initiative sign go up on the storefront. Long enough to sit with me on the porch swing, Mason between us, and say, he's trying, Dan. We both are. When she slipped away in February, Dad and I were both holding her hands. Afterward, in the quiet house, he said something I never thought I'd hear. I'm proud of you, son. Not because of the fancy client or the successful career. Because you came back. Because you're braver than I ever was. The night before I was scheduled to return to New York, my 6-month commitment complete, Dad handed me a set of keys. The apartment above the store, he explained. I had it renovated. Thought you might want a place to stay when you come back. For the quarterly check-ins with Warren. Or, whenever. It wasn't quite an invitation to stay. It wasn't quite permission to go. It was something new between us, a door left open with no expectations attached. I did go back to New York, but not in the way I'd planned. Instead of resuming my old life, I sublet my apartment and split my time, 3 weeks in the city, 1 week in Oak Ridge. The Blackwood Initiative expanded to 12 towns across the Midwest, and I became its creative director, working remotely with a team of designers who'd never set foot in a small town but were learning to speak their language. Dad and I established a fragile piece that, over time, grew stronger. We learned to work together by focusing on what we each did best. His intimate knowledge of the community and its needs, my ability to translate those needs into a digital presence. We still argued, still occasionally hurt each other with careless words. But now, when the tension rose, one of us would take Mason for a walk around the block. We'd return calmer, ready to try again. The store thrived, becoming a hub for both traditional hardware needs and a new generation of creators. Dad, to my ongoing amazement, took a particular interest in mentoring young entrepreneurs, especially the quiet, creative ones who reminded him, perhaps, of a son he'd once failed to understand. As for Warren Blackwood, he got much more than a rebranding out of our arrangement. The Rural Business Initiative became the cornerstone of his company's corporate responsibility program, generating the kind of authentic goodwill that no marketing campaign could buy. When he visited Oak Ridge last Christmas, he and Dad spent hours talking about business evolution and community responsibility, finding common ground neither would have predicted. Mason, of course, became the unofficial mascot of Callahan Hardware and Design, greeting customers and sleeping in patches of sunlight that moved across the newly renovated floors. Warren's daughter outgrew her allergies, but by then, Mason had become mine in all but legal ownership, a living reminder that sometimes rescue goes both ways. I still have the framed contract Dad gave me all those years ago, the one that was supposed to define my future. It hangs on the wall of my studio above the store, alongside my RISD acceptance letter, which Mom had hidden, not destroyed, and returned to me before she died. Together, they tell the story of roads not taken and roads eventually found. The truth is, I didn't come back to Oak Ridge to save my father's store. I came back to make peace with the past, to find a way to honor where I came from without being limited by it. To discover that sometimes the most challenging path isn't leaving or staying, but finding a way to do both. Last week, a high school kid came into the store looking for supplies for an art project. Dad called me over and said, "My son's the expert on that stuff. He went to art school in Rhode Island." The casual pride in his voice was something I'd waited a lifetime to hear. The family we're born into shapes us in ways we can't escape, even when we try to run from them. But the family we build, through choice, through forgiveness, through the slow, imperfect work of growing toward each other, that's the legacy that matters. I still don't have all the answers. Dad and I still struggle sometimes to understand each other. But we're trying. And some days that's enough. If there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's that healing rarely happens in grand, dramatic moments. It happens in small gestures, repeated daily. A conversation that doesn't end in argument, a question asked with genuine curiosity, the simple act of showing up when it would be easier to stay away. This isn't the end of my story, or even the most important part. It's just the chapter where I learned that coming home doesn't always mean giving up who you've become. Sometimes it means bringing who you've become back to where you started, and creating something new in the space between. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. If you're struggling with family expectations or trying to build a bridge across years of misunderstanding, know that you're not alone. Leave a comment below about your own experiences with family reconciliation, or share this video with someone who might need to hear that second chances are possible even after years of silence. Don't forget to subscribe to see more stories like this one. And remember, sometimes the most valuable thing we can find isn't success or even forgiveness. It's the courage to be honestly, completely ourselves, wherever we are.